what are some of the things you just love to do? Like if you could just throw it all away, what would you just go do?
You're listening to the Kristof Lewis Podcast, a podcast where I have conversations with inspirational people. My name is Chris, but my family calls me Kristof. My goal is to have as many conversations as possible with people who have forged their own path by pursuing their dreams, making them a reality, all the while emitting positivity and sharing this knowledge with others. I seek these people out and share this information with you, proving to the world that you can do what makes you happy and do what you want for a living while being a good human being. We'll talk about careers, but we'll also cover any story that inspires. Let's do this while helping each other. Thanks for listening. I'm happy you're here. Hey everyone, welcome to the Kristof Lewis Podcast, Create Your Career. This is conversation number 143, episode number 242. Thank you so much for being here. I'm always excited to have these conversations, excited to learn. This was one of the conversations where, I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't learn from any of it. I learned from every single guest, every single conversation, every single episode, and I hope you do too. But this one was super good. Some of the answers were super, really good, but we are human beings and we should embrace that. And feeling emotions, regardless if you're a man or a woman, you should embrace those, but be able to react to those in a way that benefits what you are trying to achieve. So be human, be emotional, but also be rational in your decision making and be intentional in your decision making as well. Intentionality is something that we spoke about quite at length today and how that applies to a plethora of different things that we discussed today. My guest today is Tim Douglas. He's an amazing guy, a great friend. He's a speaker, a coach, and he's going on to do even bigger things. And I just have been waiting to get him on here. This one was good. A couple more of the interesting topics were refine learning and learning to learn. What the heck does that mean? So we go into that and more. This was so good. Remember, you can find this podcast on all of the podcast apps. You head over to YouTube and watch the conversation. Subscribe. That would be super helpful. Share this with a friend, and you can find me on Instagram at Kristof Lewis. So thank you so much for being here. I don't take it for granted. Thank you so much for the continued growth in the podcast, for sharing it with your friends, and for reaching out to me and telling me how this podcast has impacted your life, whether it be me, whether it be the podcast guest. That always is a way that I would say that I am monetized by the podcast. The fuel for me continuing to create this podcast is monetized by that exactly, by you reaching out and knowing that I've done my job at least to one person, or that the guest has changed one person's life by moving forward and starting something for yourself. So thank you so much for the support. Without further ado, welcome to the Kristof Lewis Podcast, Create Your Career.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. And before we go on, I just want to say it's an honor to be on here with you. I've followed your show for quite a while, and I just want to honor you for a moment and say, man, you are really honing your craft, man. The
Thank
people
you.
You have on here and the way you answer questions is and seeing you grow through that process has been inspiring for me even. So it's great.
Dang, Tim coming with the heat immediately. I really appreciate that. That's massively humbling, man. And it's cool that you've listened to a few episodes, because you're right. I've had growth, and I think that's so cool. It's one of the things I and the guests speak about every single episode is the growth in of themselves and trying to inspire that in the guest. So it's cool in the guest and the listener, and it's cool for a listener / guest to be able to see the growth in the host, because obviously, for a quick synopsis on me, I didn't know anything before this. I never did any shows, never was in journalism, nothing. So yeah. I appreciate that, man, but that's massively humbling. So thank you. But
good job, man.
Yeah, thank you. And I would love to just switch that back around and have you introduce yourself to those of us that may not know who you are.
Yeah, Tim Douglas grew up in the upstate of South Carolina near Clemson University. And shortly after high school, moved out to the Pacific Northwest, was out there 27, 28 years. And just recently, as of about 9 months ago, moved back to the upstate. Missed the Pacific Northwest, but it was good to come back home. And the purpose of that was to come back and honor my mom and my dad at, at 20, nearly 30 years. That's, a long time away from home. And so it's time to come back and honor my parents. But while I was doing that, I studied engineering when I was here in South Carolina. I kind of got into that world, civil engineering. When I moved out west, I continued that. kind of found my way through different. I love this show as far as creating your career, because I feel like that's kind of been
Okay.
um, really been a theme of my life almost, as far as like started in this area, which was land surveying outside, in the Pacific Northwest, not very fun with a lot of rain. So then moved indoors doing design work, learned design, how to do design, just kind of came naturally. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we talk about
Yeah.
education, right? Because just learning on my own how to do design work and engineering, and just kind of kept making my way from the public sector to really feeling pigeonholed. Left that, went and tried something new. Loved being able to connect with. I actually went into the restaurant business.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah, as a manager for a friend's restaurant. Love connecting with people. That I love that part, but it just wasn't my thing. And so I went back into engineering on the private side of things, and really just saw my career skyrocket. Did that for many years until about 2012. Then started sales. I went into sales for 4 years, crushed that. Was really good at that. But then just feeling again, man, just this trying to find that sweet spot,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was really true to what I felt passionate to do, and leadership, organizational health and culture, and just helping people, in their lives. So I was always kind of like throughout my career still in some level of leadership or coaching others. And it kind of dawned on me, it was like, man, I love doing that. Maybe that's what I should be doing. And so in 2016 had a transitional moment, went out on my own. And so now I have been independent contractor for engineering companies. So since that was kind of a background, and it was
Yeah.
kind of something I did really easy, and then I used that time to go and study what I really wanted to do, which was, speak and train or coach and help people just live out their highest true potential in their lives. So
So cool, man.
that's,
I love
yeah,
that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And it's cool because you touch on a lot of the things that I already like to speak about a lot, with you ending with helping other people. And I think that's really awesome. So you talked about a lot of great things there. One of the things you had mentioned was it wasn't your thing for one or two, or maybe even multiple of your careers. It wasn't your thing. So it's one thing to state that to yourself, that it's not my thing, but I think a lot of people, part in fact of why I created this podcast, a lot of people get stuck in that career and they know it's not their thing. They know they're not enjoying it. They know they really dislike what they're doing. So, how did you personally get out of that, just saying it to yourself, like, oh, this isn't my thing, to actually making the steps forward towards a career, or at least temporarily in another position or job that you like?
yeah, that's hard, man, because as I think about that, or, as you're stating that question, I think about like where I initially was, and there's still people in that same position,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's what I'm
20
saying. Yeah.
some years later, and which is cool. I mean, there's something to be said for that, I guess. But for me, it was just
Mhm.
knowing that I wanted to try something. I've always been, kind of an adventurer, at heart, and not feeling, wanting to be stuck in one thing. And so I actually had a moment in that particular career, early on, where I was like, is this what I want to be doing for the rest of my life?
Mhm.
And the answer was definitely no, right? So it was like, okay, so what do I need to do to do that? Well, entered a mentor of mine, and that's kind of how I shifted
Ah.
out of that, career, which I was at with that place for a little over 10 years,
Okay.
and doing design work. It was a public agency, kind of again feeling pigeonholed, and I could have done that thing until I retired. Um, but a mentor came into my life, and he's like, man, you were meant to do something on your own, not meant to work for somebody else. And he was like, do you mind if I help you find what that is? And I'm like, absolutely, man, let's go
Wow.
for it.
That's cool.
So that was kind of the start of it, and it was something that really spoke to me, because it was things that I was feeling about myself,
Mhm.
but no one else had ever said anything to me about it. So when I heard that, it just kind of lit a flame, right, in me. And so it gave me the courage to take that step
Yeah.
to walk
Oh
away from
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah. When you have somebody come in your life and do that, that is just like a godsend moment. Like somebody like,
Yeah.
oh, like an awesome holy moment. I mean, so how did this like?
Yeah.
So one of the questions that we talk about on the podcast, but not often, we don't always get down that far,
Sure.
is mentorship. And you said this
Yeah.
person kind of. I mean, he said he wanted to just help you. Can I help you get there? Like, how often does
Yeah.
that happen? So I'd like to think that I'm not really a huge believer in luck per se. However, I do think that hard work and putting yourself in certain positions will amount and allow other, serendipitous moments to happen. So, do you think your actions leading up to this mentor stepping in your life and saying those holy moments, saying those holy words to you of let
Yeah.
me help you find your path, like that's cool. Do you think
Yeah.
those steps helped you?
Yeah, 1,000%. And more specifically, if I can speak to how the mentor saw what he saw, right?
Sure. Okay.
So because it's like, well, how does someone see what you're doing, right? And it has to be your actions and what you're doing and what you're
Yeah.
displaying. So the actions that I was displaying to him was, he would see me interact with my family. He would see me interact with other people. And so I think it's just how you carry yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right, in the world, and how you carry
Mm.
yourself with your family and whatnot. So he saw some of those qualities in me to do that. But then to take that, to answer your question, yeah, it did give me the courage again, because it was like, hey, let's sit down and let's map out, like, what are some of the things you just love to do? Like, if you could just throw it all away, what would you just go do? And so having someone sit me down and walk through that, and
Yeah.
what we really came to is, man, you're designed for service, right? You were designed to serve others, and because it's out of your heart to do
Yeah.
that. So it's like, let's help you find a path. Well, fortunately and unfortunately, so fortunately, that helped me see some things.
Sure.
Unfortunately, he was restaurantrepreneur, so that's all he knew was restaurants.
Uh,
So hence me managing at a restaurant, for 7, 8 months, period of time. But I learned a lot through that. And so had he not come into my life and did that, that whole service thing, and yes, that is what I'm called to do. Um, and then the courage to leave this kind of cush job to go step out and take a huge pay deduction,
sure.
and then take another step because this didn't work out. The restaurant work didn't
Mm.
work out, but then to change and transition that into something else and to continue to grow from that.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, that's a lot of things like we're talking about people not wanting to do, like taking huge pay cuts and stepping into places that they haven't done before. And that
yeah,
is something that a lot of people can't get behind. And I know that's something that I've had to consider in my life as well. And I will say, interestingly enough, the one time that I was going to take a huge pay cut to willing to get my family somewhere, it ended up even being a better situation for us. So I think if you decide that you're willing to do something, sometimes good things come out of that. So no, you
yeah,
definitely answered the question really well of how that is. So if you're listening to this, you need to be thinking about, or you should be thinking about these things as we're talking about how you can put yourself in these positions in your own life. So if you don't have a mentor, if you're looking for a mentor, I'm asking I'm asking Tim these strategic questions for a reason. It's interesting and it's a great story and it's really interesting to hear. However, how can we put ourselves in this position as well? It doesn't just magically happen, even though it sounds incredible at the time, but there's a lot of moments leading up to that. So I do think that's really important that you did describe that and you're willing to do things like take the pay cuts. And I think, again, it's really cool. One of the things I see, not a lot, but a fair amount on this podcast, is other people seeing things within the guests or within ourselves that we don't see ourselves. And it's really cool that to serve others, like you're designed to serve others. And that is incredible because it serves you, or it puts you to where we are now. And we were talking on the phone the other night and it was just such a good
yeah,
long conversation. I was like, wow, this is exactly what you're trying to do. And even how you opened up this conversation right now, this recording is very special. And that's one of the things that I want to shift into right now is specifically you helping other people. So we've kind of built up into you kind of leapfrogging to career to job, or whatever you want to call it, and then being into something that you finally enjoy. So I want to know, and I always will preface this: if you are a new listener, if you're a repeat listener, you've heard me ask this question before. The question is, why do you help people? And if you're a new listener, I ask this question as simple as it sounds, because I truly believe that we should be helping each other. And by asking all of my guests this questions, the guests answer it differently. And by asking the question, it promotes the answer. So Tim, why do you help people?
First, the easy thing for me to say would be it's just innate quality, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that really stands out, and I don't know if I've heard others say it on your podcast, or if it's others' podcast, because I listen to a lot, but is something that I've learned, and I've heard it, repeated multiple times, and it is so true, is that when you learn something and you keep it to yourself, it's no good,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when you can actually take that and teach it to someone else and help them, now you become the master of that,
Yeah.
right? And you become someone, and that feels good to know that I've actually taken something, practiced it in my life, saw some results, and then be able to share that with someone and actually start to see the change in their life. That's powerful.
Yeah, man.
And so I think for me, like when I get off a phone call, whether it's helping a brother or coaching someone or whatever, and I'm just pouring out, what I've learned, man, I come off and I'm the phone and I'm like on cloud 9. And I think that's just it. It's just, we're here to be in service to one another, not just to keep everything selfishly to ourselves. And so I think for me, that's why I love to help, is just because it really helps reinforce some of those things in me. And it requires me to step up. It requires me to show up, to be able to help someone else. And so it's a challenge for me to read the books, to listen to the podcast, to continue to grow so that I can help others and be of a service to someone else.
That's amazing. That's why I love asking this question. It's a great answer every single time. And I always kind of say, like, no matter how you answer that question, it's the absolute right way to answer that question, because that's why we do it. And I love being able to see that. And you're right. I know, and I'm sure other people that have been in teaching positions or mentoring positions, when you teach something, it does feel good and you're able to help somebody, but it definitely solidifies the knowledge that you have. Mean, you're learning as you're teaching, and I think that's a very special connection to be able to share with somebody, that passing on of information. So I want to kind of back up a little bit now, and I want to shift into some of the mindset or maybe behaviors that have led towards you doing what you're doing right now. So we kind of talked about you ping-ponging a little bit about from job to career to what you're doing right now. But I want to know, throughout your life, and you can go back to your childhood or whatever, when was there a time, or was there the slow crescendo of a time of when you began to think, or I should say subscribe to a growth mindset and want to be the type of person that we're discussing right now in the present? So how did Tim become the guy he is now, essentially? Was there any behaviors that led to that success, or a pivot, or something that happened in your life that led to where we are right now?
Bro, that's an intense question. Things that come to mind as you were mentioning that were, actually as a kid, like even going back to childhood, I remember running track and cross country, like especially specifically cross country. We didn't really have a coach, right? We had like a guy who was chaperoning us out there. And so we were self-coached, and so we had to learn on our own. And so a lot of that, I think, was just innate, kind of through some experiences and feeling like, oh, hey, I can help in this. I can, just kind of help pull people together. Man, I tell you, like the guy that I am today, because when you said that at the end, who, what has made Tim, and it's decisions, and it's intentional decisions to want to be different, to want to change, to want to really take account for who you are and who you want to be. And so like that growth mindset that you're talking about, I think I've always kind of had that. If I look back over my career, over even my school Well, school was a little more play than really trying to grow.
Sure.
But
Yeah. I mean,
I'm being honest.
yeah, no.
But but anyway, it was just, I've always kind of had that. Just I don't know. I've always had that mindset of that. It's like I want to grow, and I don't never feel stuck and stagnant here
Mm-hmm.
or fixed, right? Because that's the other side of that is just stay fixed on you. You just are who
Mm-hmm.
you are, and that's the way it's going to be. And so I never felt that way about myself. I've always studied and read, and the key people like Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, Tony
Mm,
Robbins, and all those. I was always into those guys, and so. But I will say, like who I am today is very different than who I was even say 6 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago,
mm,
um, and it all came down to, even though I've had that equality of a growth mindset, it was like that still wasn't, for me, wasn't good enough. I mean, I think you listened to Ryan Mickler's show, or maybe, or you've heard of it
yeah, I'm
before,
familiar.
The
Yeah.
Order of Man.
Yeah.
And so a few years back, I got to a place to where, and I've heard of Ryan, and just kind of took a pause. But some things in my life wasn't going just the way I wanted them to go, personally, not necessarily career wise, but personal life wise. I didn't think I was being the man that I was supposed to be. And I remembered Order of Man. Let's go back and listen. So I intentionally
Mm,
started to go back and learn more to try to grow
yeah.
even more of who I am. And
Yeah.
so through that led me down some other paths. And again, it's just intentional learning, intentional practice of the learning, the knowledge hero, right?
Yeah.
So it's like really
Yeah.
putting into practice. So
Yeah, you're pulling out some episodes there of my own.
yeah,
No, you're so
that's
right.
good stuff.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal one. And they're just, obviously, so again, there's another segment within the podcast of contemplations where I literally contemplate things that I've discussed with guests, online, offline, things that I've learned in my own life. And yeah, the knowledge hero is one of those ones. So I'm not even going to spoil it here, but that's a good one to check out that relates to what you just said right here. But I think intentionally making decisions to want to be better is a good thing. However, I will pause for one moment, which probably doesn't apply to anybody listening to this, because if you're listening to this podcast, you probably subscribe to a growth mindset. But I was going to say, I will throw in there that it's not something that you have to do. You don't have to subscribe to a growth mindset. You can be that fixed mindset, and it's not a derogatory thing. You can stay in that job like you had mentioned. It's not a bad thing that some of those people had stayed in that job for 20, 30
Yeah,
years or whatever have you. Some people are very comfortable with that.
yeah,
I've had conversations like this at former jobs, and people just look at me with like big bug eyes, like, why would you want to leave this job? It's so comfortable.
right.
It's good. I want to stay here forever. And then I look at them with reverse googly eyes, and I'm like, I would never want to do that. You're crazy. Like, this just drives me crazy. So I don't know, man. It's just, you got to find what works for you, and you have.
Dude, you're absolutely right. And I was managing a team of people, and came in. This company brought me in to lead this group of people, and they hadn't done evaluations in a long time. And I started to do these evaluations of these people. And then there's this guy who'd been there, gosh, forever, right? And his skill set was way higher than some of the others. And I'm like, dude, man, like you should be in this position over here doing these things here. He had no desire to do
Yeah.
any of that. He was like 5 years away from retiring, right? So in his mind, he was like, I'm good where I'm at. And I'm like, okay, as
Yeah.
long as you're okay
Yeah.
being where you are at, great.
Yeah.
And so there comes some consequences for that, right? I mean, you can't grow in your career, you just
Mm.
kind of stay, but that was his choice, and that was
Yeah.
okay. It's like we need people like that too, right? In a career path, like in an organization, you
Mm-hmm.
need those people who are ready to do it. But I'm with you. It's like there's no down in that, but there are some people who have that
Yeah.
growth mindset, or who want to continue to seek out what's next.
Yeah,
So
and that's the beauty of the diversity of which is the human race, is people have all these different intentions of what they want to do with their lives. And again,
yeah,
from like my engineering background, and I still work in IT, there was this, I specifically remember this gentleman that I work with. He was so darn good. He was so darn good. And he'd been doing it for decades, but he was still at this one pay level. and he had just no intention of wanting to go, because next it had to be a manager spot. And he's like, I don't want the stress that comes with that. I don't want the hours that come with that. And you know what? After he explained it from the outside again, looking in, and I think this is another one where I really want people to pause, and maybe you're looking in on somebody else's life and asking questions. Why the hell are they thinking or doing this? But from the outside, as a young engineer, I was like, oh my God, I would jump at the opportunity for that. But then when I heard his story, when I heard what was going on in his life, man, he is doing fine. Like, he is so good at being an engineer at his level, and he makes plenty of money at that level. And why add to the stress? Why add to the hours and take away those hours from your family? Because he's more than realized that he's not going to get those hours back with his family. So I love that we're having this conversation right now. It's really important, and I love being able to highlight both ends of the spectrum, frankly, all parts of the spectrum. So I really enjoy that you being able to bring that up. You mentioned a little bit at the beginning of the podcast, and now with your intentional learning, I think that's very powerful to be able to do that. And yes, it coincides what I was speaking about in that other episode. So I'm very passionate about this topic right here. So I want to talk a little bit about you and learning specifically. I think it's pretty obvious at this point that you really enjoy podcasts. You love learning that way. But are there any other ways that you really enjoy learning? How do you stay current in what you're doing right now? Like, where are you learning from? So similar questions, but different. One of them is, what mediums are you using, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, aside from podcasts, because we have hammered that pretty good. I think when you say that, I think about learning, right? And reading books has become, I've become a bookworm. Never have been before in the past, right? In school, I hated reading. I hated reading books, right? Most of my adult life, hated reading books. Up until just a few years ago, when I really kind of said, okay, who do I want to be? What do I want to become? Let's go back to unconventional school. I was doing my consulting work for some engineering companies, right? So this is stuff I've been doing for 20 some years. So it's like, and I was getting, burned out on it. I was kind of disgruntled about it. We've talked about that a little bit off camera. Is like, how it's like, how do you do one thing and still trying to build something over here? And so for me, it was like, okay, I can do this without thinking. So let's go back to school. So I can't necessarily read through during the day while I'm working, but I can listen to audiobooks, right? So I started listening to audiobooks, but then as I started listening to audiobooks, I really honestly believe it really taught me to be a better reader, because then I would go, I'd get so much out of it. I would want to see the script and see it on text. So I'd get it from the library, or I'd buy the book, and then I would read the book, and I would be able to consume it a lot easier. So then it was like, then I would just go grab the book and read it.
So cool.
So it's just ways of learning how to do, how to, I guess, relearn how to read, for me.
It's learning to learn. That's such a thing that I just don't see. And I heard somebody say it. This isn't my original idea. I will say that. So somebody said that, but they said learning to learn. We don't learn how to learn. We go to school to learn things, but how do we understand how to learn? And that's such an important I think it's completely misunderstood. People might be thinking, what do you mean learn to learn? But goodness gracious, we need to get better at that.
So how to do that, right?
Yeah.
So real quick, Jim Quick, no play pun on words, that's actually his last name. So
it may be
Jim
him,
Quick was helpful for that, right? Learning how to learn. And
maybe it was
so,
him,
What's that?
I'm sorry, I was thinking out loud. I think it may have been Jim Quick when I was listening to one of his podcasts. Yeah, he's great.
Great. And so for me, it was that was very helpful. And then I would say this too: intentionally putting myself around other people of a community of guys such as yourself or others, like Jeff Forrester, who you've had on your show, and Chad and a few others. It's just intentionally surrounding yourself with people like that you can bounce things off of, that you're learning. And then as you're learning, they're like grabbing hold and they're like, oh, I like that. So again, it's a way of like surrounding, and you learn from them too, right? So you're learning from others. And so I think it's like taking that temperature level, right? I had this is where I really got to a few years ago, is like having that philosophy of we all live and operate at a certain temperature level. and I felt like I was operating at a very low temperature level. So I wanted to elevate my level. It elevated to about a 70, 70 degrees or 80 degrees. And I'm like, but I want to surround myself with people who are around 100 degrees, right? Or even hotter, because I want to learn from them. And so I think aside from reading, aside from listening to audiobooks, podcasts, things like that, it's like surrounding yourself around people that are at a higher level or operating at a higher temperature,
Yeah.
and learn from them as well.
I love that. It coincides a little bit with mentorship. That's kind
Yeah.
of strategically what that does. But again, one of the words you've said a few times, which is really great, and I completely agree with, is intentionality and being intentional in the things that you're doing. That is something great to take away, and clearly it's working for you. And surrounding yourself with other people is significantly important. That's one of the huge reasons that I do this podcast, is to speak with people and learn from people. I feel as if I'm being mentored many times when I do this. So
That's so good.
yeah, man, it's the honest to God truth.
I can
And
see it. I see
oh
it.
yeah, it helps. I mean, it really does help. So I want to end on one of the things that I've been kind of on a kick lately, ending like this. It's like it's not a Disney. I guess some Disney movies end pretty sour. So this is not ending sour. But what I want to ask is, I want to talk about some of the hardships before we get out of here. And I want to know if there was a time in your life, a time in your career, maybe more specifically, that inhibited you from doing what you're doing right now that you really love, that you really enjoy. Was there a time when you just didn't think you're going to be able to do it? Maybe somebody or something occurred in life.
Ooh, wow. The thing that comes to mind, there's not much of a hardship comes to mind, but I think it's still worth mentioning, is that even though you're doing something, and man, I'm trying not to get emotional here, because that's an intense question, because when you have something in your heart that you want to do so badly,
Yeah.
um, and you're in the workplace, right, or you're in a career path, and don't despise the time that you're there, but build on something else over here. And so for me, I think that has felt like a hardship a lot of times, because even though I'm on the side, I'm doing independent contract work. I get to work out of my home. We talked about that before, but at times I feel like it's a ball and chain, because I just want to go and meet with people. I just want to be out there, speaking or doing other things, coaching, helping change lives. Right. At times that feels like a hardship of doing the dream, right? The passion. And so, yeah, that's what comes to mind, man.
No, yeah, and like I said, it's like with I would say with all the questions that I asked, there's no wrong answer, and that is just a classic one of that. Everybody has their own issues or obstacles or most interesting problems that they've overcome, but you're clearly overcoming that. I mean, you're on the damn podcast right now. You are at home. I am at home. We are having this conversation. We're able to record it. We're able to learn from each other. We're able to share this story and all these topics and all this passion and love of the things that we care about with ourselves, with each other, and with other people. So you're doing that right now. So you're able to overcome what you just described to me with the present moment right now. And that is very powerful to me.
Can I add to that? And I know we're probably bumping up against time here, but it's just something that's been really, that I've been very passionate about. And it's a messaging that I've been kind of, a tagline I've been hanging on to, and it's "Face the Storm."
Yeah.
You follow me on Instagram, you may have seen some of it. The buffalo behind me, and the story of the buffalo is the storm comes, and the cow runs the opposite direction and it catches them. The buffalo runs towards those storms. And even what we're talking about with trying to build your own career or learning or things like that, sometimes that can feel intimidating, and can come with much trepidation, right? And so it's like, no, sometimes we just need to face those things head on, and we're gonna come out better on the other side, right? And so anyway, I just wanted to share that, because that's kind of where I feel like I'm in now, this season of just keep facing the storm.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think even before I'll reach in the historic pocket of the podcast and go even pre-podcast, I made a story that was on YouTube before the podcast that talk about stress that you make for yourself, essentially, I coined it good stress. So this is kind of what it reminds me of, is being the buffalo going into the storm. Not only are you meeting the storm quicker, but you're getting through the storm quicker because the storm is passing through you instead of following behind you. And I think that there is good stress in life. Like, I could have stayed at that job, or you could have stayed at a job where you were comfortable and you would probably have limited to no stress and you'd be okay. But by forcing yourself to grow and subscribing to a growth mindset, you thus shift into stress that you're putting on yourself. So be cognizant.
100%.
Yeah, so be cognizant of that and understand that it is stressful, but that is required for growth. Yeah, man.
100%.
So this has been great. Another powerful episode. I'm more than happy that we did this already. But before we get out of here, how can people get a hold of you?
Instagram. I'm on Instagram quite a bit. Tim Douglas Inspires. You can reach me at timdouglasinspires.com, and I'm on Facebook some as well. But Instagram is a big hotspot for me right now. So yeah.
Easy day. Yeah, you guys will be able to see that. I know you have a website. I can throw that in there as well. You'll be able to see everything on there and get a hold of Tim. Tim, thanks so much for being here, man. It was, like I said, it was really powerful. I love that we're able to cover so many different topics, and then you're so genuine in your responses, and it's obvious to see that you care about what you do, and that's what this is about, man. This is inspiring me. This is something that I hope inspires someone else listening to this podcast to be able to go out there, to make these shifts in their lives, put themselves around people, even if you have obstacles, to overcome them, and just really go out there and make an impact in your own life and also make an impact in other people's lives. But you don't have to wait until you have your shit figured out to be able to help other people too. And that's just what you're doing, man. So I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your night, and thank you for your time.